So in this video, we're going to cover one of the important features of programming, which is functions. In terms of C# and Unity, when you hear the word function, you'll also hear the word method. So programmers that use the C# programming language, mainly in Unity, will call all their functions methods. And so when we make our scripting file today, we'll look at the two methods that are already created for us, which is the start method and the update method. And we'll compare and contrast those to general functions in other programming languages. So here we are back in Unity. And I have my scripting folder opened up. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new scripting file for our functions and methods. So I'm going to right click, go to create, and go up to C# script, and then I'll label this functions and methods. Now, in order for any of the scripting code to work, it has to be attached to a specific game object. So from previously, I had a basic empty game object that we had our variables attached to, and then we also have a generic player object. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag and I'm going to put this functions and methods script file on the player so that we can create a custom method to move this player in our scene. So I'm going to grab the functions and methods, drag and drop it on my player object, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio. So now that we're back in Visual Studio and I've got my public class functions and methods, as previously mentioned, we're given a void start and a void update. These are essentially functions, but here in C# they're called methods, and those two words are interchangeable. Other languages use the word function versus C# where we're using the word term methods. If you hear those two words, they're going to be interchangeable. And so these are pre-built methods for us to use, and we can also create our own custom method. One thing to note is that if you are missing the word public in front of your methods, or there is no private word in front of the method, that's the access modifier, by default these are going to be private methods. Private methods cannot be accessible from other scripting files. And so for us to go ahead and create our own custom method to move that player object, I can put my cursor after the closing bracket, and I'll hit enter twice just to give some space here so that I can provide a comment. So 2 forward slashes, and let's make a method to move the player. So we're going to make a method to move the player forward. If I do not want any other scripting file to access this custom method, I can put the word private, or I can negate the word private, but it's a good idea to have these there for practice until you realize the flow of the files themselves. So I'm going to use private, and then I'm going to use void because I'm not going to return a value to be used in any sort of way. It's just going to run the statement that's inside my code. So I'm going to use the word void, and then I'll say move player forward, followed by an open and closed parentheses. And then I'm going to push my cursor to the end of the line and hit enter, and I'm going to create the curly brackets. This is the structure or a box for your method. It needs to have your access modifier. Is it public or private? Is it going to return a value or not return a value? So it'll be void, or this could be int or string or float. Whatever the data that it needs to be returned will have a value in there, followed by the name of the method. Method names are in Pascal case, so they start with a capital letter and then a capital letter for every consistent word in there. And so if I want to move my player forward with this custom method, I can do the transform.translate, and I can use a vector 3 in the forward direction times, let's say, a private speed variable, which we have not created yet, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And then in order for me to get rid of the red line for the air, I need to create a variable. So this is a practice from previous example, is I can come up here to line number 6. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to create a private speed variable of type float. Make sure you put the data type, and I'm going to assign this to 10F originally. That way now I have my variable assigned and declared, and then I can call upon this method here in the update. Because this transform.translate is not using physics to move the object, I can use the update method. If we were using physics and using the rigid body, which we'll cover in a later video, I would want to use a different type of update for that. And so here, in order for me to call, the word call is it's looking for this function, grabbing its code and placing it in here as well. And so I can call with the name of the function, followed the open close parentheses, followed by a semicolon. The semicolon is okay here. It ends this statement just like a period on a sentence, but you do not want to put the semicolon here when you create the custom method, only when you call the method. And so if I went ahead and do Control S to save, and let's see this custom method being run. So I'm going to save my file. I'm going to jump back into Unity. And here back on Unity, we have our scripting file, and I'm going to play test. And you'll notice that the actual object is moving away from me in the forward direction. So this method, the move player forward code, was grabbed from the update and is running the player down the road. So go ahead and get out of play mode, go pop back into our Visual Studio. And so this is one type of method that's not going to return any information. Let's look at that. Let's look at how do we create a method that returns information. Usually you'll have what they call parameters that bring in information, perform some calculations, and then output that information. So I can go ahead and do 2. And let's create a method to return a number. Okay. So I'm going to create a private int for integer, because I'm going to return a whole number, and we'll call this add to numbers. Now, in order for me to add 2 numbers, I need to create what they call a parameter. That goes inside these open and closed parentheses. That's information that needs to get passed in here to perform the calculations and then return the value. So I can create an int integer for number 1 and an int for number 2. These are what they call temporary variables that are only used within the scope of this function. And then I can return, that's the key word, that whenever you are not using a void method, but you're returning a data type, it needs the keyword return, so it passes that information back. And so I can just do num1 plus num2 followed by a semicolon, and this is going to then take in 2 numbers and then pass them along. Now, where would I want to call this custom method that returns a number, and how do I put in the parameters? I want this to run one time, so what I can do is I can put this in the start method. And so I'm going to call the method called add 2 numbers, open close parentheses. I need 2 parameters, so I'm going to go with the number 4, comma, and the number 9, followed by a semicolon. Now these 2 numbers from the add 2 numbers method will come down here. It's going to be put in here, and then they're going to get added, and it's going to return that number as well. So make sure you do a Control S or Command S to save your file. Go hop back into Unity. You wanted to verify that information. What gets printed out here in the console has to have a specific method to run. So if I went ahead and pressed play, test. My player moves, but nothing's being printed out. What's happening here is that in our scripting file, in order to see this number, we got to print to the debug.log, so it prints to the console. So I'm going to wrap this in that. So debug.log, open, close parentheses around the method. I know that might be a little confusing, but we have to put the method itself inside the debug.log so that it actually prints out the number. So 4 plus 9. If I go ahead and save my work, go pop back into Unity, clear my console, back into play mode, and it's going to print that out. So there it is, number 13. 4 plus 9 is 13. It prints that information out. So that method grabbed the two parameters, passed them in, added them together, and passed it back to the start method that prints out here in the console using the debug.log. And so there you have it. There is some of our examples on methods. Again, functions and methods are interchangeable inside of Unity and C#. We're going to call them methods, whereas in other programming languages, you're going to hear the word function used. And that's going to go ahead and give you a couple of examples to get yourself started with functions and method. Thanks for watching.